It's literally 10 p.m. on a school night and I just got the urge to make this video, so here we are. Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. I actually am doing this video as per request, but I'm super excited about it because I think that it is a perfect video to do on YouTube. So I had somebody ask me if I could do a video just kind of clarifying different fitness topics, concepts, or even like abbreviations and things like that. I feel like there's so many different terms in fitness and so many different like things that people just say naturally. Like I know I say a bunch of stuff naturally that I don't realize that some people don't know what that is. And so I asked you guys in a cute little Instagram box to just tell me some things that you wanted me to touch on. And so that's what I'm gonna be doing today. As I did with the Q&A, I just have them on here so that I can like read them because I'm videotaping on my phone. Sorry if I look a little tired and out of it. It's literally 10 p.m. but I just got the urge to do this because I was like, I want to get these answered, and this is like my first time really reading them, so this will be like very natural and organic responses. So hopefully everything that I say makes sense, but if it doesn't, I'm happy to give clarification. You can just DM me or comment down below. So the first question was about compound movements versus accessory movements, what those are. I know I say this so often, like my compounds, my accessories, and I don't even think twice about it. And so I do want to clarify what these are. So compound movements are essentially your squat, deadlift, bench, hip thrusts, things that are going to be loaded with weight and you're going to try to progress a lot more and you can go a lot heavier on. Whereas accessory movements are things like lateral raises, lat pull downs, Bulgarian split squats, things like that that you're going to progress at a slower rate, but they are accessory movements that help to strengthen, that can help to strengthen portions of your compounds. So just think of compound movements as the movements that you would do first on these days. So you're always going to see someone do squat first, bench first, thrusting, things like that, because these are the more tiring and harder movements to do. So when you Google compound movement, what you will see is that it's a multi-joint movement that works several muscle groups or muscles at a time. So when you think of something like a squat, you're bracing your core, you're working your quads, you're working your glutes, you're working your hamstrings, you're working a bunch of things at once. And so a compound exercise is something that's going to be more of like you're working a lot more than you think you are, whereas an accessory workout, so something like a quad extension, you're working your quads. So I guess the biggest takeaway is that a compound movement is a movement that is going to work several different parts of your body, is going to be the most exhausting, but also is going to be something that you can push and progress to go a lot heavier over time, whereas an accessory movement is going to work more of an isolated muscle or muscle group, and they're kind of like supplemental to your compounds. So whenever I discuss compounds, just know I'm talking about squat, deadlift, bench, hip thrust. Those are like my main compound movements. And then when I say accessory work, that's something like a split squat, quad extension, bicep curl, things like that. So somebody asked about hip dips, and that's something that I actually have a whole post on my page dedicated to that. I will put it in the description below, and it is on my page. I think it's, oh, I just kicked the camera. I think it's under a highlight that's like Get Informed with Schmeg. I talk all about hip dips, but hip dips are normal and they're based on anatomical structure, and so that's why some people might have them, some people might not, and you can't ever get rid of hip dips. However, you can make them less noticeable if that you're packing on the muscle around the hips. So for me personally, I have done a lot of abductor work, and my fat distribution when I gain weight does kind of go more to my hips and glutes. Therefore, I can kind of mask the hip dips that I used to have. However, I don't think that hip dips need to be masked or something that people feel like they need to change, because again, it is bone structure, one, and two, I think they're cute. Somebody asked about a deload week. I talk about this a lot, so I do want to discuss this. I personally have a different training style than a lot of other people, and that's because I am training for strength at the moment. So when you're training for strength, you typically are going to have a block. So what a block is essentially a training block of X amount of weeks. So for me, I typically do like a 6-week training block. So within those 6 weeks, at the end of that that sixth week, sorry, I can't speak. At that 6th week of the training block, I will have probably PR'd in some way or done a 1 rep max of one movement. So like last block, I did squat. I'm currently in a deload week, so what that means is the week after that you're maxing, it's good to give your body a rest and time to reset before you keep pushing weight on it. So a deload week is essentially just lowering the load of weight and intensity. So I definitely recommend deload weeks, and that's why in my guide that I produced, I said to, if you decide to run it again, to take a deload week and then go again, because by the end of that guide, you hopefully have hit a PR of some sort. I got a ton of questions about progressive overload, so I'm just going to go over this the best that I can. However, I would really recommend looking up, if you know who Brett Contreras is, if you look up his blog, he has a whole thing about progressive overload that I've learned so much from, and I just think that's the most important information that you can get from it. So essentially, progressive overload is challenging the muscles more and more over time so that you don't plateau. I'm gonna link this down below because this really helped me when I didn't understand progressive overload. So here are some different ways that you can implement progressive overload. So you can lift the same load for an increased distance. So increasing range of motion. For example, when I do seated bicep curls, I do that to get increased range of motion. Lifting the same load of volume with better form, more control, less effort. So as you increase your efficiency of a lift, that will help you progressively overload over time because you're getting stronger and better at the lift. Lifting the same load for more reps, so that's considered volume. For example, I just hit a PR where I can do 225 for 4 reps, whereas in the past, I could only do 225 for 1 rep, so that's volume. Lifting heavier loads, this is what I think everyone thinks progressive overload means, which isn't true. You don't have to have a new 1 rep max all the time to be progressing and getting stronger. But that is something that, you know, I think people shoot for a lot, which is completely fine, but that type of progressive overload takes a lot of time and planning. You can do lifting the same load and volume with less rest time, so you can do different intervals and time intervals. That puts your muscles under different amounts of stress. And another thing that I really like is time under tension. So doing your movements more slow can help to kind of work on those muscles and take more time, because I think sometimes people rush through movements and aren't getting the full effect of what they can be. You can look at that in 2 ways. So you can increase time under tension or you can decrease it, and those can both have an impact on progressive overload. There's a bunch more, so I'll just let you guys like look through that article if that's interesting to you. But it is really important to just always remember form comes first. Like, please do not try to 1 rep max every week. That's not normal. And it's also important to realize that progressive overload is not always linear. And so I think the other day someone messaged me and they asked me about bench and how I was progressing my bench. Bench at the beginning, because I was still a beginner, it was linear. For a really long time, I was able to add maybe like 2% a week, whatever. I'm at a plateau. Like, I cannot add 2% anymore. And so once you hit a plateau, you need to decide different ways that you can get to progressively overload your muscles. And so at the moment, my brother has me on a training block where I'm practicing pause bench, or where I'm practicing higher reps instead of weight, things like that. So that is how it can be implemented. I know it seems like a lot, but essentially progressive overload is increasing the weight, stress, or demand on the muscle over time. You can't just do 135-pound squats forever with the same rep schemes and think that that is going to continue to challenge your muscles. That's why you plateau if you don't try to kind of push those weights over time. So that's what I mean by progressive overload. I know it seems like a lot again, but basically progressive overload is your best friend, especially when it comes to your compound lifts, which I just talked about. I really recommend Brett Contreras for any types of questions, especially about like leg and glute training, because I feel like he is very knowledgeable on that subject. Somebody asked me how to reset the barbell after failing a squat, so how to get it off the safety rack back up. I would say once you fail the squat, so when you get down, you lean forward, the bar stays on the safety racks, unload the bar, put the bar back up, then reload the bar if you're planning to continue squatting. I'm assuming that like the weight, if it's too heavy there, it's probably too heavy to push back up onto the rack, in just my opinion. So the safest way to do that is just to take the weight off and then reload it. Kind of a pain, but safer just for your upper body as well. A lot of people have been asking me about deadlift form, deadlift breathing cues, deadlift anything deadlift, and I really appreciate that people think that my deadlift form is great, and I just want to make sure that people understand that everybody's deadlift form is going to be a little bit different based upon their measurements and based upon a ton of different factors. The way that you pull could be different from someone else, and that doesn't mean that your form's bad or their form's bad. there's just different forms for deadlifts depending on a lot of things, especially if someone's tall versus short, things like that. I will definitely at some point do a video discussing deadlifts and my form and cues that I follow, but I'm not going to tell you what's good and bad form necessarily, just because again it varies from person to person. Another thing that I got a lot of questions on was about cutting and bulking, and so I'm going to give you guys a very brief generalized version of this. However, I really recommend doing your research if you do decide to do either of these things. I will be honest, I've never been through a bulk or a cut. I think I've always been on a lean bulk since I was in high school now, just because I eat a lot and I work out. But if you want to be intentional with bulking and cutting, do your research, because you have to figure out what's going to work for you, but you want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So cutting and bulking, essentially what cutting is you are eating less calories than you are burning, and so that you're going to be in a calorie deficit. A calorie deficit, again, eating less than you are burning. Understand that the calories that you are burning don't just come from exercise. You have different metabolic processes in your body where you are burning. I'm literally burning calories just sitting here being alive, and so that's something to be aware of. Bulking is eating in a caloric surplus or more calories than your daily intake needs. Yeah, that's like the basic definition. I got you with the basic definition. However, a lot more goes into bulking and cutting than it seems, and I don't want to make either sound like they're easy. They're a process. You need to do research, and if necessary, I would definitely consult a registered dietitian. But essentially, a cut is being in a caloric deficit and a bulk is being in a caloric surplus. And by doing so over time, you need to be doing this over a period of time. You can't just cut for like 2 weeks and think that you're going to lose X amount of pounds, because you want to do it in a healthy, slow, stable manner. Same thing with bulking. It takes a lot of time to gain weight the same way it takes a lot of time to lose weight. Like, I think people only think of it as like, I want to lose weight all the time, but to gain weight, to gain muscle, it's hard. Like, people sleep on that process, and I'm not okay with that. So both of them, they take time, and it is important to consult and think about your macronutrients. That's not something that I do, but that is something important to think about. And I would truly, if you can't do the research or the research is too difficult for you, I would consult a professional, because that is someone that's going to help you do these things. I'm not a professional, so I don't want to give too much advice there. So I got a question about supersets. A superset is doing 2 exercises back to back without a rest between, for that's being 1 set. An example of a superset would be to do 10 reps of dumbbell bent over rows, and then to go straight into, let's say, 8 reps of rear delt flies right after. That's a superset. And then once you do that, that's 1 set. And then if someone says 3 rounds or 3 sets of that superset, then you would do that 2 more times. I hope that makes sense. Somebody asked me the difference between supinated and protonated. So supinated is like this. Protonated is like this. So when I say a single arm protonated row, your arm is like this, palm down. And then an example of a supinated movement would be like a supinated pull-up. So your palms are facing you and you're pulling up. And then this would be protonated. So sup, pro. A question about what RM means for squat. RM just means rep max. So if I say a 1 rep max, then that means that is the maximum that I can do weight-wise for 1 rep. So for example, my 1 rep max for sumo deadlifts is 270. So if I was training and I said, okay, I want to train at 70% of my 1 rep max, I would take 0.7 times 270, and that would give me 70% of my 1 rep max, and that's what I would train at that week. So that's why that value is calculated and used in slang like that, is because your 1 rep max can be utilized to calculate different reps and sets that you do throughout the week, as well as it's just an abbreviation that people use. So yeah, if you ever see someone say like 1 rep max, 2 rep max with the RM, that's what that means. Okay, I got a few questions about what a split is, so I do want to talk about this, and I will talk about how to make an effective split, because that was another question. When people talk about their workout splits, essentially what that means is their workout pattern. So what order they do each day in. So like, let's say someone does leg day on Monday, and then on Tuesday they do chest, shoulders, tris, and then on Wednesday they do a glute focused leg day. On Thursday they do back and biceps, and on Friday they do full body. That would be your split. So your split is specific to you and your goals, or just like what fits in your schedule. But then I got another question about how to make a split. That's something that's going to be specific to you and your goals. However, how I make my split personally is I like to break it up. So if I'm doing a lower body day, the next day would be an upper body day, then a lower body day, then an upper body day, because you don't want to train the same muscle group every single day. Your body needs time to rest, recover, and repair, because when you work out, your muscle fibers are tearing a little bit, and so they need the time to repair and grow. That's why you take rest days. That's why you don't train the same muscle group every single day. When I made my split for myself, I thought about how many days a week I wanted to do lower body, how many days a week I wanted to do upper body, and then how many days a week I wanted to work out. So let's say I want to do 2 lower body, 2 upper day, and I want to work out 4 times a week. Then I'm going to say, okay, I'll go Monday, Tuesday, rest day, Thursday, Friday, rest day, and then we go again. And you can keep a split for as long as you want to. I've actually been on the same split since quarantine. I think also with a split, it helps with discipline. So for me, I know what I'm doing on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every single week. And that's helpful for me. That works for me. And that's why a split can be beneficial for you. Somebody asked all the different types of squats and deadlifts. So there's 2 types of deadlifts that I feel like you've probably heard of. So that's going to be conventional and that's going to be sumo. Sumo is my favorite. So that's going to be your wide stance. Your legs are going to be far apart. You're going to grip the bar and you're going to go up. That's sumo. That's not a good definition. Then there's conventional, where your feet are about shoulder width apart and you're pulling that way. And then there's a lot of types of squats. There's high bar squat, low bar squat, there's sumo stance squat, and there's like a narrow stance squat. There's a lot of different types. A lot are just down to preference, in my opinion. So for me, I do a sumo squat because I don't have amazing hip mobility. I've had knee issues, so sumo works best for me. Yeah, so those are all the different kinds. If that's still confusing to you, I would look up conventional deadlift versus sumo deadlift, see what is going to work best, 1 for your metrics, so for your body, and 2 for your goals. But I think implementing both is great as well. Maybe not all at the same time, but it is great to try them both. Somebody asked about mind to muscle connection. I think this is a good one. Essentially, mind to muscle connection is a conscious and deliberate muscle contraction. So you're thinking of what muscle you want to contract and you are contracting it. Mind to muscle connection takes time. I feel like once you're experienced enough, you know what muscle you're working and that muscle gets worked. But at the beginning, for example, like I still struggle a little bit with like maybe triceps, because that's not a muscle group that I work a lot. And so I have to think a lot about like the movement. Sometimes it helps to hold where you're doing the movement. So for me, like if you've noticed, a lot of people sometimes will like hold their side glute when they're doing like lateral abductions with like the cable machine, and that's because that's where you're targeting, and sometimes just touching that muscle group can help you in your mind to muscle connection. Okay, so somebody asked me about the difference between a push and a pull day. I personally do not use this method of training. I know tons of people who do push and pull days for their upper body. I will go over what Google says because I think that's going to be the most helpful. So a push workout is training the upper body muscles, so chest, shoulders, tries, because these are muscles that you do a lot of movements where you're pushing. So for example, chest, you're going to be pushing the barbell up. Shoulders, what do you do for shoulders that you're pushing? Like a Arnold press, like you're pushing. My shoulder always clicks when I do that. Whereas a pull is where you're going to be doing the pulling muscles. So this says back and biceps. So when you think about like biceps, like you're pulling it towards you, or for back, you're pulling into a row. I don't know. I think I'm explaining that right. Again, that's why you got to kind of do your research. I don't know too much about this. I personally don't train in this way necessarily. If I do, it's not purposefully, but I've heard great things about it. However, I think just picking the muscle groups that you want to isolate and doing them is perfectly fine as well. Somebody asked me about can I speak? Somebody asked me about periodization. So how how periodization can be used to hit PRs. By periodization, I'm thinking of different ways of programming. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking you mean. So I'm going to explain a few. So there is linear, variable, and undulating. These are all 3 different ways that you can program yourself to progress. So for deadlifts, they're not going to be linear because I can't move up 5% every single week on a deadlift. That's not practical. And so For deadlifts, I use more of an undulating pattern where some weeks I'm gonna go up, some weeks I'm gonna move down in weight, but I'm gonna change rep schemes. So that's kind of more undulating because it's kind of, you can bounce back and forth. Whereas bench is a more linear movement because you can pretty much move up 2 to 2.5% of your 1 rep max over time until you plateau. Once you plateau, then you're gonna need to kind of change your way of doing it. But for the most part, bench can be considered linear. Somebody asked me what hypertrophy means. Essentially, hypertrophy is the growth of your muscle, so muscle growth. This is pretty much what everybody wants. So hypertrophy from Google is the enlargement of an organ or tissue due to an increase of its cells. Essentially, hypertrophy is going to happen 3 to 4 weeks after you start resistance training, and then obviously progressive overload drives hypertrophy. So you have to practice those techniques to increase your muscle mass over time. Additionally, I want to talk about neural adaptations. I learned about this in school actually. So neural adaptations happen for people who are new to training. So that first 1 to 3 to 4 weeks where you're not necessarily going to have hypertrophy gains, you're going to have neural adaptations. Actually, what a neural adaptation is in respect to resistance training is actually going to be like increased strength, because when you think about it, if you're new to something, the same way I was new to bench, people were like, how are you progressing your bench so fast? Because my body is still able to get stronger. Like, my body hasn't really been tested in this. So essentially, like, I can have an increase in, I'm gonna have more of an increase in strength in the first 4 weeks than I'm gonna have in muscle mass. So essentially, hypertrophy is an increase in size, whereas neural adaptations are an increase in strength, and you will see the most increase in strength during the beginning of your fitness journey. And then as you go on, you're going for hypertrophy because you want your muscles to grow. And with that, you will obviously get stronger, but it takes a lot more time than it does at the very beginning. So I wanted to touch on that because I thought that was interesting when I learned it in class. Somebody said upper body, I'm lost on breakdown of muscles and what workouts to do. I think the best way to answer this question is that your upper body is composed of a lot of muscles. And so I think the best way to split them up, or a way that I split them up personally, is chest, shoulders, and tris. So your chest, your shoulders all up in here, and then your triceps back here. And then a lot of people do your back and your biceps together. And I have tons of workouts on my page that kind of take you through what workouts target these muscles. But if you want to learn more about these muscles and where they are, I would personally just like Google each muscle and then kind of go from there. And you can even Google like tricep workouts that work the tricep. A lot of this, unfortunately, is like trial and error and like researching and stuff. So a lot of the stuff that I personally know right now, I had to do a lot of research, or I would just watch people's Instagrams. And if it was like a quad focused leg day, I would learn that like, okay, quad extensions work well for this. So that's something that I would recommend doing. What are macros and how do you count them? Macros is just what people call macronutrients. So your macronutrients are going to be your carbs, your fats, and your proteins. I would just say the easiest, not the easiest, but the only pretty much way that you can track these yourself is to either self-calculate using something like MyFitnessPal or some type of tracker that you can upload the foods that you're eating, and it can do that breakdown for you. Or you can like do it by hand, but that just would be a lot of work and I wouldn't suggest doing that. Same thing with calorie counting. If you did want to be in a surplus or deficit, the way that you would count your calories would either be to log them manually if you have like a food scale and you want to look at like nutrition labels, or you can use something like MyFitnessPal that's more easy to use, where you scan things and then you estimate about how much you ate. Both of these are perfectly fine. Again, I don't do this personally, so I don't have a ton of experience, but I could definitely refer you to someone who has more experience. But again, with food and with these kind of things, I would definitely consult a registered dietitian over anybody else if you have questions. This is just a generalized piece of advice. And then the last thing that I will say that I think is helpful is that there is a calorie calculator from my coach school, which is run by Lucy Davis. If you don't know who that is, I love her. I think she spreads a lot of positive science-based facts on her page, and that's why I really like her a lot. I've learned a lot from her. She has a program that she has with her boyfriend, and they have a calorie calculator on their page. It's free to use. You put in all your metrics. It uses a specific calculation, and then it will email you back very specific numbers for maintenance calories if you want to be in a slight surplus, a heavy surplus, slight deficit, heavy deficit, etc. Again, those are just the numbers. You need to do the rest of the calculations yourself. I don't know that much about this, but that is the general advice that I can give you. And again, consult somebody who knows more, especially when it comes to your diet, because you don't want to be over or under doing anything, and you don't want to be making extreme changes fast. You can't just go from maintenance calories all the way down to a deficit. You have to slowly reduce your calories, or slowly increase your calories. You can't just go 0 to 100 on either way. Somebody asked about a hip hinge. Essentially, a hip hinge is any movement where your hip is literally like hinging, if that makes sense. So like a hip thrust is a hip hinge, glute bridge, cable pull throughs, anything like that. Hip hinges are probably one of the best things that you can do for glute activation, and that's why on a glute day I would be doing thrusts, cable pull throughs, things like that, because you're getting that main contraction on the glutes. Okay guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It is literally 11 o'clock p.m. here. I'm tired, but I just wanted to film this for you guys, and I hope that everything that I said was clear. As always, I would always suggest doing your own research on top of this, because everything that I've described today for you guys, I've done a little bit of research on, or I already had prior knowledge, but this isn't everything to it. A lot of these concepts are very packed with information that you need to find for yourself, and a lot of these concepts are things that are individualized based upon your goals, and that's something to be very aware of. So I really enjoyed doing this, and I would be happy to do this more on my Instagram story as well, or I can do another video like this in the future if you guys have more concepts you want to talk about. Hopefully this helped you, and yeah, I can't wait to see you guys in my next video, and hopefully that comes out soon. School has just started for me, and so it might get a little bit busy, but I'm gonna try my best to upload as much as I can, and I appreciate all the love and support, and I hope you guys are doing great. So I'll talk to you later.